Counted us down, folks. Welcome to another delightful episode of Missouri Swagger. This is episode 13. I'm Dennis Hopeless.
And I'm Cullen Bud. I'm repositioning my camera so it's right in front of you on my screen so that I'm looking directly at you, it seems like.
That's good. I try to. It's weird because the little screen of me is at the top. So I'm always trying to look at the camera, but I end up looking at myself, which is weird.
I'm always trying to look at myself. It's like my computer is a tiny mirror.
No, it makes me uncomfortable. I see all my imperfections.
Yeah, well, you got to have a high-def camera to capture all of those, brother.
So today, as promised, we're going to be talking about comic book writing process.
I love that we're doing this. I have no idea what the subject is today. I knew process, but I didn't know what we were talking about process-wise.
I was going to kick it to you because I feel like I'm always the first one to talk. But if you want me to go first, I can go first.
Oh, I don't care. I just I'd love to hear what we're going to talk about. What aspect of process? For me, Dennis, creating a comic book is such an ephemeral art form.
Okay, you're done. So what? I've been thinking a lot this week about the difference between my favorite projects and other things that I've written, and like what it is about things like Spider-Woman, and I don't know, I'm not going to list them all, but things like Spider-Woman that I've really personal stories that I am really proud of and that I'll sell at cons forever, like and other things that I've done that are fun and that I enjoy doing, but that aren't as important to me, didn't hit quite as hard. And what I've come to is that what I am good at, or I don't know, what I like writing, what I really get into when I'm writing, is I either write journal entries, like diary entries, or I write love songs. And if I can't explain some way that my story is that, it's not going to be a thing that I'm most proud of. Spider-Woman obviously is a diary entry. I wrote about Spider-Woman having a baby when I had just had kids. I mean, that thing, you want to dig deep, that thing's got a lot more diary entry in it than that, but that's pretty obvious.
Right.
And I really like love stories. I really like love songs. My favorite movie of all time is Love Actually. And
we've talked about this.
Yes.
You're not going to redeem yourself.
I'm going to redeem myself. So what I've started trying to do, I've got a bunch of new pitches percolating and new creator-owned books, is try to figure out how to make sure that the story is in some way that. And sometimes it is the case that you start with the diary entry, that you start with the thing that you relate to, that is the most like you. And other times it is you start with a really cool comic book story idea, or like a plot, and then I have to figure out a way to bake in that piece. So I was going to go through a couple of examples and how I found like what the books ended up being about after the fact, because I accidentally baked in personal life stuff, or how I found the characters through finding what I relate to. I was going to talk about that a little bit. So that's where I'm going to come from. Where are you going to come from? What do you want to say?
I don't think of any diary entries or love songs when I'm writing.
Well, no, we work. I think that's why it's interesting, because you and I come at stories from a very different perspective. So,
I have for all my years writing, and this goes back to when I was in high school, and then specifically when I was in college, and I was I was taking creative writing courses and all this, and I remember sitting in those creative writing courses and people saying, I really want to discuss your themes here. I want to discuss the themes that you've put into this story. And they go on and on and on about these themes, and what I found is that more often than not, these were themes and ideas that they brought with them to the story. It was not things that I put in the story, and I've always been fascinated by that. And sometimes it bites me because I get people, when I was writing Sinestro, there was this one reviewer who kept coming at me and saying how Sinestro was nothing except Cullen Bunn talking about how much he hates the police and how much he hates law enforcement. which is the most ridiculous concept I've ever heard. I mean, I remember laughing and laughing at those reviews because this guy had just baked in his own hangups into my story. I knew what I thought Sinestro was about, but it was a very simple, it was a simple, plot for me, a simple point. But people, bake in all these other ideas, with all these stories. For me, every story I work on and the ones that I really enjoy the most, it's about me trying to work something out in my head. Usually it's working out anger. I think if if you read, say Magneto, Magneto's a very angry book, and really dig deep into Magneto because I was trying to work through a lot of anger at that time and a lot of feeling of being powerless against things that are going on, around me. And sometimes it's things that are currently going on. Sometimes it's me thinking back on things I went through years ago and how I would have rather handled something. Not that I have magnetic powers and can throw rebar through people, but it helps me exercise some of those inner demons.
You want to do that daily?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to. I have to. No, for me, most of the stories that I get the most out of, it's me kind of working things out in my head. Sometimes they're negative things that I'm working out. Sometimes they're very positive feelings that I'm working out. And, but I don't usually sit down and I don't sit down with the intention that this is what I'm going to do today. It just starts happening as I'm writing.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean by diary entries is oftentimes it'll find its way in. I mean, sometimes, the pitch of Spider-Woman having a baby was a diary entry. Like I knew
well, of course. Yeah.
But sometimes it'll find its way in. Before I get there, I wanted to say I had a Cullen Bun rage moment this morning. When I was headed to the coffee shop, there's a crosswalk right in front of my street. And at certain times of the day, it is very busy traffic. And on both sides of the street, there's a little yellow sign with a man walking across the street on it that says that the pedestrians have the right of way. And I got halfway into the street, and then this big cement truck goes by super fast, almost killed me. And I took a step back and watched all of these sons of bitches follow him. Just like, well, this guy's going, so I'm going to go, while I pointed at the sign and stared at him. And by the end, I was pointing in their faces and pointing at the sign. They didn't care. But in the middle of that, I thought it would be worth getting hit by a car just to make the point that they're not supposed to be driving through this crosswalk.
I do think things like that quite a bit.
Yeah, I felt very much like you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that stuff finds its way in sometimes when you're not expecting it. Like, so Jean Grey, my pitch for the Jean Grey series was very simple. It was young Jean Grey lives in a world where everybody else knows about adult Jean Grey. Everybody else knows about Phoenix Jean Grey and this like super powerful, super put together adult who, did all these crazy, wonderful and awful things and then, died. And she's not there yet. She's a teenager. She's 60s Jean Grey. She doesn't have all of that experience and isn't ready for it. And I was like, well, what if we brought something down that only adult Jean Grey can deal with? And young Jean Grey, turned out to be the Phoenix, but young Jean Grey is not prepared for it and knows it. So she has to go through the process of learning from other people and places in the Marvel Universe in order to be prepared to deal with this thing. And so my idea was, well, the first arc will be like Marvel Team Up, where she'll go around and hang out with Thor and Namor and learn things from these different people. Very simple concept. It was super fun to write. But when I think about it now, and when I look at what I did with it, I was very much writing a superhero version of what I was doing in my personal life, because I was going through some crazy personal life stuff at the time. And I was what I do is talk through my problems. So I would call everyone I know and get their version of advice or their version of perspective on whatever it was I was going through, and try to learn from that and gain perspective and figure out what to do. So I kind of accidentally made a superhero version of all of these weird, what the fuck am I supposed to do now conversations I had with all my friends and colleagues and editors and anyone who would listen to me, frankly. And then the second arc, I kind of got past that point. I got past the point of just like spraying my problems at everyone I knew. And it was more, okay, now you got to deal with the depression. You got to deal with the
yeah,
where your life is left after this thing. And I wrote a story about Jean being first completely useless and then battling a giant firebird like it's she's slaying a dragon. And so when I look at those scenes, I feel like that was me wrestling with my demons and stuff. And while I had no idea that I was doing that, I did not do that on purpose. I did not intend that in the plot stage, but it was definitely me working through those sorts of things. And so, yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And I think that I got a better story out of it than I would have if I hadn't been going through that stuff and if I hadn't been put that into the story. So I'm trying to figure out now, like, well, how do I kind of lean into that from the outset? Like, how do I craft cool plots and cool character beats ahead of time that will allow me to work that stuff out on the page?
Yeah, I've always felt like it's a real it's like walking a tightrope, and because I feel like if you try to force that stuff into it, it comes across a little disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if you're afraid of it when it surfaces, then you're not going to get the most out of your story. So you kind of have to, you kind of have to be open to it and ready when that kind of when those kind of connections to your real life strike. But I also, for me anyway, I can't, if I sit down and try to figure that stuff out, it always feels weird to me and doesn't feel true to who I am as a writer. And there's the difference, is that every writer's going to be different about it. Some can make those connections right away, and others, they have to let them happen. I have to just sit there and let it happen to me.
Sure. I mean, it comes from it has to be a jumping off point. Like, that's why baking it in later works, is because you're adding something to a story that's already a story. Like, nobody wants to read a superhero story that's just about how sad you are, But if it's a cool plot that you get, like Cloak and Dagger was sort of like that for me. Cloak and Dagger it's like the white whale of comic book properties, where for whatever reason, all of us comic book writers remember it fondly and think the characters are cool and have some notion that we want to write it, partially because nobody's written it for a very long run in a while.
Right.
But when I was offered that job, I knew, like, this is a cool job. It's going to be a TV show. It's, it's something that hasn't been done at any length in a long time. Like, I've got an opportunity here. And I had absolutely no clue what to do with it. Like, I was completely lost in the weeds because, I don't have a lot in common with those characters. And when I went back and reread the old stuff, I loved it, but it's not what I do. Like, I don't do hard-boiled 80s street-level detective fiction. Like, my Spider-Woman was sort of a detective story, but that's my version of that. That's not what I do, and I didn't want to.
It was more Rockford Files than Mickey Spillane.
Right, exactly. And I didn't want to lighten the characters up too much because I don't think it makes sense. I think they're
right.
pretty brooding characters. And I mean, I was ready to walk away, and this was a time when walking away from a job was a bad plan. Like, I needed that job whenever it was offered to me. And I didn't want to walk away, but I didn't know what the hell to do. And I got on the phone with Devin Lewis, and he said, well, they've just been through some shit in Secret Empire, and Tandy's more powerful now. What if we split them up? Like, what if we broke them up, and then we could deal with their weird codependent relationship? And then my head was on fire. So that's it. Like, that's some human shit. Like, I understand that. I understand codependency, and I can do that. So I leaned all the way into that. But that's just the outset of the story. That's where they are at the beginning. Rick Remender told me something when I first started working at Marvel, that you don't have to explain how the characters got to where they are at the beginning of the story, because people's minds will fill in the blanks, or they'll assume there's some comic they didn't read before where this happened.
Right.
So I didn't have to show them breaking up. I just had to show the aftermath.
They were broken up.
That they're broken up. And that was my jumping off point, and that's how I created the villain. Actually, I think Jasmine came up with the idea for the villain, but it all came out of that thing, like that place, which allowed me to.
Was it Mr. Breakup?
Story. No.
He just goes around.
The villain's name is
ruins relationships. He breaks up heroes, destroys marriages.
Well, Tyrone and Tandy are pretty obviously yin and yang characters. One's lightness, one's dark. And the villain in the book is called the Gray, and that she came up with that notion. And then I took that and wrapped it up in what I was doing and came up with it. Mr. Breakup, you're the worst.
That's
but
why
yeah,
we are different people. I like Mr. Breakup. I would put that in a comic right now. In fact, I'm going to work on a comic today, and it's going to be about Mr. Breakup.
I did. There is a character that I pulled from an 80s Say No to Drugs Marvel comic book that I use in the first issue. She's a corpse in the first issue, but her name was The Fix, and she was a member of this group of drug-themed supervillains from the Say No to Drugs comic. Nobody caught that. Nobody was like, "Oh, hey!"
No, I'm surprised. I'm surprised no one wrote to you and said, "How dare you kill off this character?" They never got a fair shake.
Yep, they didn't care. No one noticed.
Oh well, I'm sorry, Dennis.
That's an Easter egg. Go find her.
That's funny because I collect all those little message comics, the Say No to Drug comics, and
well, you probably didn't read my Cloak and Dagger because you're not a good friend.
It was only digital, right?
God, I hate you. Just die in a fire. It's not only digital. It's digital first. There's going to be a print.
That's what I meant. Digital first. Has it come out in trade?
Not yet.
All right. Well, when it comes out in trade,
I expect you to call me and tell me how much you love it as soon as it's out.
For God's sakes, Dennis, I have books of yours right here.
I know you have them, and you read them often to learn how to be a better writer. And you try to hide.
Well, I read them, and I'm like, oh my God, another fucking diary entry. When you just shift a love song, just one shift to a love song.
There's a love song. There's a lovely love story in the second half of Spider-Woman about Porcupine and Jessica.
No, I like all that. I like that stuff in Spider. I read Spider-Woman. Come on.
Of course you did.
Yeah, I think I too often I'll fall back, especially with superhero books. I fall onto let's start with this is a cool idea rather than the coming up from a personal level. And sometimes that traps you into, a cool idea is cool, but it can't support a comic for 5 issues, 10 issues, whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, you need both. You don't want, if it's just a diary entry, if I hadn't found a cool villain and found a cool superhero plot, nobody would have stuck around for what I was trying to say about relationships or whatever. So that is important. And I lean the other way. A lot of times I'll forget to make a cool hook that I can sell the book with. And I'll just be like, hey, here's this book that if you happen to love this character enough to read it, you're going to think it's fantastic. But no one new is going to care. We kind of ran into that with Pregnant Spider-Woman. I think that was like the only thing that was said about it. So we got all new parents, and those people will love me forever. And it was an uphill battle to get a lot of other folks to care at all.
No, I remember the comments on Pregnant Spider-Woman. I read all that.
I still sometimes at cons will hear that that book is terrible because a pregnant woman shouldn't be fighting crime.
Yeah.
And at no point in that series does a pregnant woman fight crime.
Yeah.
Does not do it.
That's a whole nother episode. We can talk about comments all day long, Dennis, but we're not.
No, I think it's fun. I think this is because I was trying to figure out how to make this useful, because it's really just us like talking about how our minds work. But yeah, I think examples are good. Like, here's this story that I wrote, and here's what I was trying to do, and this is what I found about it. I think that's fun. So why don't you get one of those? Find a superhero thing, something lots of people will have read that you like how you found it. Like Magneto was a good example. What else?
Well, Magneto. I mean, if I talk about Magneto, when when I first was offered or I was asked to pitch to write Magneto. And what I did was I wrote the first 4 pages, which is the scene where this guy's talking, like giving an interview about, this guy came into town and I heard him talking to this guy, and then he just, and then he threw him out the window and he did something awful. And we cut to this scene of this guy in the street, and he has all these, rebar or signposts sticking out of his face. And I sent that in. I said, this is my pitch. Magneto is a serial killer. He's a horror. People are scared to death of him. And this is a story about people telling the story about how Magneto is awful and terrifying, and how we shouldn't, and how he should be feared, and people need to take care of him. And that was my pitch. And that was my initial, version of the story. Is I wanted to do a story about Magneto roaming from place to place, doing doing vile things for what would be seen in his eyes as the right reason.
Sure.
As that story went on, I started working on it. And I think you probably heard me complain about this quite a bit because there was a lot of inner monologue in that book. And I hate writing inner monologue.
It's writing poetry. It's the worst.
It's like writing. I think it's worse than writing poetry, but I mean, it's awful.
It's just hard. It's like, I think it's effective. I think you do it well. And I think I do it pretty well. And when it works, when it lands, it's great. But it is so time consuming because it's so ham-fisted if you do it wrong. And you end up overwriting. You write so many pages of shit and you cut it down to almost nothing.
Yeah. Yes, I like it once it's done, but I hate the process of doing it because it's time consuming. It takes a lot of time. But as I started working on it, I realized it was less about Magneto as the serial killer and more about a man who had done terrible things and trying to get to a point. It's about self-justification, and the capacity to justify the things you've done in the past for a greater good, and or sometimes not even for a greater good, just to justify yourself. And the rest of the series is really about Magneto trying to justify everything he's done, and everything he will do. And I felt like at the time, I was angry. I had a lot of anger issues going on, and that's where a lot of the violence and Magneto doing mean things to people comes from. But also, I just think a lot about us about people in general, and maybe myself specifically, about how it's so easy to justify mistakes. To not accept the mistakes you've made as mistakes and justify them instead.
Oh yeah,
and that's kind of the thing I was trying to work out while working on Magneto.
Right.
I don't know if it worked out. I still justify everything I do. But I was trying.
I think as long as you've got something like that you can build into what the story is. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Mine are usually diary entries, but I was thinking WWE is the exception that proves the rule in my case, because basically what that book is me fixing continuity that annoys wrestling fans.
Right.
Because wrestling shows are not written as a narrative. They're written to get you to watch the next one. So there's lots of things where wrestling fans are like, well, that doesn't make sense, or this didn't work out how I wanted, or the ending. Well, there's no ending. So what I get to do is take those matches and then like explain shit in the middle that fixes the continuity, and fans love it. But it's just like it's a weird little puzzle that I do every time. And there's not a lot. I mean, I put cool character moments that I think are relatable in there, but there's not a lot of my life in that.
Right. Well, same thing, I think, with like a book like Fearless Defenders, which is a book I still to this day get a lot of people at conventions and things like that coming up. They really love that book. And that book from the get-go was I wanted to have fun writing a superhero comic. And the story pitches for that book were very sometimes they were goofy. Like I had an issue where I wanted all the ex-boyfriends of all these characters to go to a bar and talk about the heroes. Right. And that was my pitch. I just wanted to write a book about ex-boyfriends being sort of sad that they weren't with these women, and that they weren't out fighting they weren't out fighting crime with them. And then another issue I wanted to do, we've talked about it before, I want to do a tribute to a dance, to dance movies. So I just wanted to do a book about dancing, and that's what I did in the middle of a Marvel's big event at the time. I wanted to do an issue about dancers, and for me that book was just it was just about fun, and I loved all the characters in the book, and I wanted to show them shining in some way or another. But it was more about having fun with that title rather than trying to dig deep into any. I mean, there were character moments, but I don't think it was ever meant to be a character study. Just while you were talking, I came up with an idea for a new Missouri Swagger episode, and maybe a little bonus feature. All right.
I think that you and I should watch your favorite Step Up movie, because Cullen Bunn loves Step Up movies. He loves dancing movies. And what's the best one? What's your favorite?
Step Up 2 is by far the best of the Step Up movies. By far.
Okay.
In fact, after we're done, now that we're talking, I'm going to watch that final dance.
I think what you and I should do is watch it and record the audio of our conversation while we watch it, and then do an episode afterward that is us talking about it. And the viewers can, if they want to, we'll give them the thing early so they can, I guess we don't have to get, it's all, they can watch our episode anytime they want. But they can listen to us talking about it in like a Mystery Science Theater sort of way. And then they can listen to our conversation about Step Up. Because you and I both really like dancing movies. And I don't know that we've ever watched one together.
No, we haven't.
So that's process. That's Missouri Swagger process right there. I just explained how we come up with the stupid shit we talk about on here.
That's right. Well, hey, I did think, you were talking somehow to make this useful.
Yes.
So if I were going to offer advice on what we've discussed so far, I think it's one of those things, putting a pitch together for a series or an idea for a series is daunting in general. I think it's tough for people to do. And I have done both sides of things where I've put one together a little lazily, where I've just said, here's the idea. And sometimes those ideas get picked up and then you have to run with the one sentence you wrote and turn that into something useful.
Almost, I think every single Marvel book I've ever done, except for Avengers Arena, falls into that category.
Yeah,
it's all based on one sentence. I had to figure out how to make a story.
So, and the other side of it is you can work that pitch to death. You could just develop it. And I've seen pitches. People want to share their pitch for series, and it's the pitch itself is longer than a 12-issue comic series would be.
Right.
And what so I think. And I think some of what hangs people up is what we've just been talking about right here, is sort of these different ways of approaching a story. One being, let's go with the cool high concept idea that has a hook, and the other being, what's the emotional and personal side of things. And you need both of those.
Yeah.
But I would encourage people to not stress in the pitch stage. If you're not getting both of them in the pitch stage, don't let that stick your story at that level. I mean, Absolutely. Because I think it's going to come out. If you want to, you focus. You have to have an idea for what the story is. There has to be a plot, right? And the characters kind of interact within that plot. But once you get to writing it, that's where that stuff starts to surface and boil up. And if your initial idea is heavier into the character side of things, that's awesome. The plot's going to come together as you start working on it. If it's more into the plot side of things, the character side of things will come up. Like in some cases, like Dennis was saying, he thinks about it a lot. And mine, I kind of let it happen from a subconscious place.
Right.
But it will happen. And then you can start piecing it together. I mean, I would encourage people to not stress, you know what your story's about, but
right.
Don't stress too much initially about what it's, the big picture, what it's really about, what's the theme.
Sure.
Until, don't stress about that to the point that it destroys forward progress.
Well, pitches are frustrating because what a pitch needs to be, first and foremost, is an explanation of the hook. So the idea, but told in a way that explains why anyone wants to read this. Like
right.
the one or two sentences you would say to someone to get them to read your favorite book. That is the hook. And it's got to sound fresh and interesting and exciting, and it has to get people going. So you have to have that. You also have to know the beginning, middle, and end on some level. It's a little bit different for Marvel books because they're ongoings, and the characters aren't going to be done afterward. Usually, you have to leave them, so they're a little bit more of a perpetual second act. But you need to know some sort of ending, some sort of conclusion to the ideas you set up. So beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
And that is basically all you have to have. And if you have that, it's an effective pitch. The problem is, in order to get that beginning, middle, and end, you have to have thought about it enough to know the whole story. Because otherwise, you're summarizing something that doesn't exist. So it has to exist enough in your head and be fleshed out enough for you to say the beginning, middle, and end. But then you have to not be beholden to all that flesh, because once you get
it's going to start changing.
Right. Well, because you need to work outside in. You need to go like big idea, broken down into big, simple plot, broken down into scenes, broken down into pages, broken down into panels. And at every stage, you want to be able to rethink each one of those things to flesh them out and find all of the stuff. So you can't be beholden to the version that existed in your head when you're writing.
You're absolutely right. And I have a great example because I just finished what I call script apocalypse, where I had this big project due, and I've been really working hard on it for a little while, and there were a lot of pages. This was a huge book. And I have just been forging ahead on this thing.
Right.
And yesterday, as I'm nearing the end of the book, I opened up the pitch because I was looking up a character name. So I couldn't remember a character name. So I opened up the pitch, and I realized there were tons of things that I had put in the pitch that did not make it into the book, and there were things in the book that never got mentioned in the pitch. It just sort of it kind of grew into something completely different. I think there are even in the differences in the pitch in the final product, there are elements of the pitch that can be seen in some of the themes and ideas, but it's a different story because I was just going with where the story took me.
Right.
And from the pitch, I had to have that 3-act, beginning, middle, and end description that just didn't work as I actually got into the writing of the book.
And you have to be willing to pull up track and knock down walls and stuff as you're going. I've found recently that before I write the first issue, I now want to write some sort of rambling stream of consciousness plot outlines for each issue to give the editor, so I can get another set of eyes on things, and they can point stuff out that I will usually figure out the day that I'm writing the script.
Yeah.
So I can kind of restructure the plot as we go, which allows me to be a little bit more, scalpel as opposed to sledgehammer whenever I'm thinking about the plot in the writing stage. It makes me a lot faster.
Right.
Also, I'm good editing as a godsend. It makes a huge difference having another set of eyes and people who can see some of the things coming you're too close to it to see. So the more you give your editor, the more the more.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If you can do that, that's awesome. I don't always get the chance to do it, but I always want to do it.
Well, you write at much faster clip than I do. You have a lot more on your plate than I do. So I don't either.
Not anymore.
It's mostly just that I'm in my own way a lot. I'm trying to get out of it though. Yeah, we all do this stuff differently too. Like you don't have to do this stuff the same way we do just because we're telling you. We're just trying to explain.
No, you have to do it the way I do.
Yeah, exactly. You want everybody to just.
I want everyone to do exactly what I do, and that's my way of slowly destroying everyone else's career.
There you have it. I feel like we should ask the viewers, the listeners, what they want to know about process, because you and I could talk about any tiny part of this for hours on end because we think about it a lot. But I'm not actually sure what people are interested in knowing about process.
That's a good idea. So in the comment section.
Yeah.
In the comment section, if you'll write what you're in, and maybe that comment is, I'm not interested in this.
Right.
This jackassery. Please just talk about abandoned theme parks and romantic comedies some more. But if you are interested in specific things, I would just say mention it in the comments, and we will definitely try to cover that in upcoming episodes.
Because we want to. We know a lot of you come here because you like our work and you're interested in comics, and I feel like a lot of comic book fans like process stuff. But we're so inside baseball on it, I'm not sure whether we're hitting the interesting notes or not. But we definitely want to regularly do, at least once a month, do one of these process videos where we talk about the work. Because, you and I talk about the work a lot between ourselves, but a lot of times that's about upcoming work or about some stuff that's so in the weeds with it that no one's going to understand. So it would be nice to get a little direction from you guys on what you want to hear. If you want to see how much chest hair that I'm growing for my Razor Ramon costume for Halloween, I could show you that. Colin told me I had to wear a shirt. That was what was going at the beginning of this episode. But
that's my contribution to society today. Dennis has to wear a shirt.
Just let us know what you want to see, hear, do. I think this step up episode is happening whether you like it or not, because I think it'll be funny for me. But beyond that, just let us know. Let us know what we want to hear about for the next process episode.
Yeah. Anything else, Dennis, about this rambling discussion about how we don't know what we're doing?
We know exactly what we're doing.
All right.
It's just messy. It's a messy process.
Do you want to share
Swagger?
A swagger story today?
I got a swagger story. Coming off the heels of realizing I'm the villain of Missouri Swagger, I wanted to tell a story about the origin story of my villainy, as it were. And also something that every time I watch one of these, I have a hard time watching Missouri Swagger. I like to see what works and what doesn't work, and how we could tighten things up. Like I'm always trying to make it better. So I try to watch at least a little bit of each episode. And the thing that bothers me is that the view of me when we're doing this is very straight on. So it's very obvious how fucking crooked my nose is. I have an extremely crooked nose.
Let me look at your nose.
You guys aren't going to be able to unsee it now.
Oh, I can't. You're right.
Yeah.
What a disaster you are.
I am. I'm a physical monster. But so I can tell the story of how I got my nose broken, and what happened, and why I'm a villain. So when I was 16, I was a real piece of shit. I started dating the girl that I dated until college when I was 14. And at around 16, I think her parents decided that was not a good long-term plan, and started kind of pressuring her to see other people in high school, which at the time I thought was the most monstrous thing that had ever happened. But
did they also feed you lots of cake?
Solid. They did. They fed me lots of cake and cookies. It was double stuffed Oreo cookies and fudge to fatten me up.
Is this the same woman?
Yeah, it is the same woman. Yeah.
Okay.
I had one girlfriend in high school. I dated her from 14 to almost 19.
All right.
So yeah, that she broke up with me the year I would turn 16, or like between 16 and 17. She broke up with me, and to date a friend, like not a good friend, but a friend of mine. So I was in a really dark place, and I started hanging out with this other friend group that I had met at my job at Hardee's. And that guy, my buddy, got promoted to assistant manager of that Hardee's. He started working like 60 hours a week. He just graduated high school and wasn't going to go to college. He was doing that. And I got myself fired from Hardee's because I tried to work fewer hours, because I just didn't want to work as much. And I went in and tried to demand that I was going to work fewer hours. And he's like, you can work a lot fewer. There's the door. So I left. So my buddy went from working, a reasonable amount to working constantly. And I was working none. So I was hanging out with his live-in girlfriend all the time after school to avoid my friends and my ex and all of this. And that was a problem. Like eventually we started to have feelings for one another, and we became really good friends. And so I was falling for my best friend's girlfriend. And she eventually told him that she had feelings for me, and that therefore was going to end the relationship. And he lost his mind and freaked out and told me about it. I'm like, well, look, dude, that's how she feels. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. And then later that night, he came over to my house and crawled up the back steps and looked in the rear window of my house, and I was making out with his girlfriend on my bed, like a real piece of shit, just like a monster. And so he came and rang the doorbell, and I go to the front of the house, and my mom's like, your buddy's out front losing his mind. What's going on? And I open the door, and he pushes me. And at this point, I feel like the biggest heel in the world. Like, I'm learning the lesson of friendship is more important than, a makeout session, and you have to be smart about your relation. I'm learning all this on the fly. Feeling
also,
terrible.
Close your damn curtains, Dennis.
Well, I just shouldn't have done it. It was dumb. I was in a dark place, and I made a mistake. But I'm thinking about this at the time, and and he pushes me, and he like punches me, like swings at me a couple times, and I put my hands up, and I'm like, man, I'm sorry, I'm not going to fight you. And then this kid, who's probably 130 pounds soaking wet, drops me with the craziest punch to the nose I've ever experienced. Like, I probably outweighed him by 30 pounds, 40 pounds, and he sent me back on my ass, crushed my nose, like just collapsed everything in my face. Blood's gushing down. The girlfriend's come out and is crying and holding him, and my mommy had to take me to the emergency room because my face was destroyed. By the way, if you ever get your nose broken, they can't do anything until the swelling goes down, so you might as well just wait, because they give you painkillers, I guess, but they can't really do anything. So the reason this is a Missouri Swagger story is not just because I sucked at 16, but I go to my father's house for something a couple of days later, and he sees me, And I'm not a fighter. I like never had black eyes or anything as a kid because I don't fight. And my dad was like really into getting into bar fights and stuff when he was younger. So I think I walk up and my old man thinks, finally my son's become a man. He's gotten in a fight. I'm going to hear this story. He asked me what goes on, and I tell him the story just as I've told it to you about how I made this mistake. The look of disappointment on this man's face that I let a smaller kid punch me and had my hands in the air. Like he didn't even let me finish it. He's like, I don't care what you did. If someone puts their hands up, you put yours up and drop them. And I was like, yeah, but, and he just looked at me and shook his head and turned around and walked away. Like he ended the conversation by leaving me standing in his backyard. And I just watched him go. I think he started the lawnmower and took off. Didn't say goodbye, and I left. And that is not the most Missouri thing about this story, though, because the most Missouri thing about this story is 2 days later, the swelling goes down, and I go to the doctor, and the doctor is laying like a splatter shield on my chest as he's like looking at my nose, and he's saying, well, we got a couple options here. You can leave it. Like your breathing is a little bit impaired, but it's not too bad. We can leave it, but it's pretty crooked. Or we could go in and do surgery, and he's looking in my nose with the little viewer thing, and while laying this thing on my chest. Or we could do surgery. We could go and do a couple different surgeries. We could perfect it, get it nice and straight for you, but that's going to be surgery. Or I could and then he takes his thumb and bears down and leans in and re-breaks my fucking nose right there on the spot. It didn't bleed, so the splatter shield wasn't necessary. I was like, there you go. Gets up and walks out. So my nose is currently, if you look, the exact shape of that doctor's fucking thumb, and will be for the rest of my life. So this is how we fixed it. So that is how we deal with high school infidelity and fist fights and plastic surgery.
You deserved that punch, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was the best lesson I ever learned. I deserved it 100%. I learned a lot that day, and I'm glad. And it was a good learning experience. 16-year-olds suck. So if you're 16 and you make mistakes like that, learn that one day it'll be a funny story you can tell on your YouTube channel.
I think what people really want to know, though, and what I really want to know is, did the girl stick with you or?
Oh, no. Absolutely not. No. She was nice to me for a couple more weeks, and I think we hung out. But what happened was because of
you saw how your nose was so crooked now, she couldn't take it?
No, I was still pretty. Just a little bit. It was added character to my face. No, I think what actually happened was not that she was so embarrassed by me taking the punch. It was that her entire friend group was friends with him and now hated me. Mm-hmm. So we could hang out alone or with my friends she didn't know. Also, she was 19 and I was 16. So it was a little bit weird, I think, for her to hang out with a bunch of younger kids who didn't know her and weren't thrilled about it. Right. I got back together with the other girl after that and then dated her until college. So it was a dark time for old teenage Denny.
All right.
So there you have it, folks. As a teenager, I was terrible.
Just as a teenager.
I'm great now.
You've become a much better human being. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. We're going to record another one this week, I think, because we missed one a couple weeks ago for New York. I don't know what the next one's going to be about. It is not going to be the dance movie episode because
not yet.
I don't have time for watching dance movies. But thanks for joining us today. If you like the video, hit that little thumbs up or leave us a comment or a review. If you're listening,
tell us a review on iTunes. Share the video, share the podcast, tell your friends about it. We're trying to get this thing out there. I'm going to start promoting it more because I think we got something here, folks. I think we're gonna take all your money one day.
And if I can plug something real quick, Dennis, as we're leaving,
do it.
If you're listening to this on a podcast on the same network, you'll find a new podcast called Tequila Cast, where me and my neighbor drink shots of tequila and tell you all about them and review them for you. So check out Tequila Cast when you get a chance. We're going to have Dennis on as a guest tequila shot drinker at some point, hopefully in the near future. And
you don't know this about me, but I love tequila shots, so I am down.
Well, all right, we'll have you on a few episodes then so that we can just All right. But yeah, check that out if you like that kind of thing. And we will be back next time. Thanks,
See you,
everybody.
folks.